Here you are on Broadway. It was the connector in the middle of town. Up until the 1850s, the steamboat line, the railroad line, and the stagecoaches all converged on the square down there. And in the 1850s, they moved the trains up here to Union Station. So this was the intermodal connection between the trains and the stagecoaches and the steamboats. So it was a very busy central arterial. Building on your right was the Quackenbush building, another great big department store in downtown. And you'll notice that the first floor doesn't look so hot. If you had been here about 30 years ago, most of downtown Troy looked like that. That was a Rite Aid. And everybody thought during the 20th century the best thing you could do with these old rundown ancient buildings with the wrong architecture on them was cover them up with plastic and aluminum and make them look like that. Now everybody thinks it's wrong-headed, and actually there's been a facade restoration program in Troy which helps match property owners' money to restore the facades to Freer building. It used to look like that. And about 1985 they tore it all apart, restored the front. David Bryce has been restoring that for quite some time now. Unfortunately for him, that very ornate first floor facade that you see here in this photograph doesn't exist anymore. So he's going to have to reconstruct it. Doesn't quite have the money to do all that yet, so he's working on it. So it's one of the last facades to be restored. I should say one other thing. Troy did very, very well. One of the ways that they tried to make this the Silicon Valley in the 19th century was to create the Rensselaer School here. In November of 1824, just as the Erie Canal was about to open. It started in an old bank building by the river up that way, but then they moved downtown into buildings right here, and unfortunately there was a little bit of a problem. That Green Island Bridge, that silver bridge that you see there, that's the fourth bridge to be in that location. The first one was erected in 1835, and it was the first railroad bridge anywhere across the Hudson River. It made Troy a really important rail hub. As late as the mid-1920s, there were 120 trains a day going through Union Station in downtown Troy. And the original bridge was a wooden covered bridge. And originally they didn't allow the trains to go under their own power through the bridge. They pulled the cars through with teams of horses because they didn't want the sparks from the smokestacks of the locomotives setting the train on fire. Well, the Civil War broke out. They decided they really needed to move things along, and they also decided that the spark arresters on the locomotives had gotten good enough that they would arrest all the sparks. So they started letting the locomotives go through, and not long after that, on May 10, 1862, almost exactly 150 years ago, it was a very windy day. The wind was blowing this way, and one of the trains set the bridge on fire. And sparks from that blew over here, and it burned down 75 acres in downtown Troy. So RPI didn't know quite what to do, but they decided to move up the hill, right up on 8th Street, right up above us, where there were two primary buildings and a couple of little small ancillary buildings. And then in 1904 and 1905, they had back-to-back fires in both of those buildings. One, the main hall, was so badly damaged they demolished it. That's where the approach is today. The other one, the Winslow building, they rebuilt. It used to be a chem lab, and it's still there, substantially rebuilt. When that happened, they started saying, why are we in Troy? The president of Columbia University invited them to go down to New York City and to merge with Columbia and take over the famous Columbia School of Mines. They were going to be Columbia Rensselaer University. Everybody in town panicked. They raised a lot of money. They talked them into moving, and they got them the land up on the bluff up there, which is where RPI is today. And to entice the people to come, they built this classical staircase right at the end of Broadway so that the students could hike up and down the stairs between the train station and the campus when they went up there. That's the famous approach, which was rebuilt about 15 years ago.